Billy, project manager at a small but very solid tech company. Let's call it Innovatech. Not a flashy startup with beanbags and kombucha on tap. Just a quiet, profitable business that designed custom software solutions for industrial clients. Think logistics, manufacturing, stuff that actually makes the world turn. The team was small, maybe 20 people total. Most of us had been there for years. The atmosphere was perfect. No drama, no corporate nonsense. You were judged by one thing: the quality of your work. If you delivered, you were respected. Simple as that. My right-hand man was Dave. Dave was our lead engineer, a guy in his late 40s or early 50s. One of those geniuses who could look at a million lines of broken code and find the one misplaced semicolon in 5 minutes. He'd been with the company since it started. He basically built the whole technical foundation. Dave was old school in the best way. Told bad jokes, brought in donuts on Fridays, and treated everyone with the same level of respect, from the intern to the owner. He was the heart of the office. We had a great rhythm. A client comes in with a problem, we design a solution, and our team builds it. We hit our deadlines, we stayed under budget, and our clients loved us. We were making good money, life was stable. Then, sometime last year, the original owner decided to retire. He sold his majority stake to an investment group. The investors told us not to worry. They said they loved our business model and wanted to help us scale up. First step in their plan: hire a new modern CEO to take us to the next level. That's when she arrived. Her name was Alma. She walked in on a Monday morning, probably in her mid-30s. Had that specific look of someone who spends more time curating their LinkedIn profile than actually working. She called an all-hands meeting in the main conference room. We all filed in, expecting a talk about Q4 targets, new client acquisition, market strategy. Nope. For 30 solid minutes, she didn't mention our products once. It was a fire hose of corporate buzzwords. She talked about reframing our corporate narrative, fostering a culture of psychological safety, and breaking down legacy power structures. I remember looking over at Dave. He had this completely blank expression, just nodding slowly like he was watching a foreign film without subtitles. The grand finale of her speech was about how her main goal was to transform Innovatech into a truly inclusive, forward-thinking, and equitable workspace. We all clapped politely. Nobody knew what else to do. The vibe in the office changed almost overnight. Alma's first official act was to institute mandatory weekly culture workshops. Every Thursday afternoon, for 2 hours, all work stopped. We'd all have to sit in the conference room while a consultant she hired on Zoom talked about unconscious bias and workplace privilege. The first session was bizarre. We had to go around the room and state our pronouns. Most of the guys just mumbled through it. Dave looked like he wanted to crawl under the table. These workshops were a massive productivity sink. Thursday became a black hole. We all knew we'd have to work late on Wednesday and Friday just to make up for the lost time. But you couldn't complain. If you even hinted that the workshops were a waste of time, you'd get a weird, passive-aggressive look from Alma. She started making small changes. The company's stock photo library for marketing materials was purged. Any picture with a white male was deemed non-representative. She rewrote the job descriptions for open positions to include paragraphs about commitment to diversity and equity. Experience and skills were suddenly listed below these statements. I tried to stay out of it. Head down, focus on the projects. Keep the clients happy. My philosophy was simple. As long as my team is delivering, the corporate fluff doesn't matter. That was my mistake. I thought competence was armor. The first real sign of trouble involved Dave. We were in a project kickoff meeting for a new client. It was a complex job, tight deadline. Alma was sitting in just to observe the team dynamic, she said. The client was outlining their needs, and the scope was getting bigger and bigger. At one point, our account manager asked Dave if the engineering team could handle the increased workload. Dave, in his usual cheerful, can-do way, just chuckled. He said something like, "It'll be tough, but we can manage. We'll just need all hands on deck. Maybe even end up manning the support lines ourselves on launch day to make sure it's smooth." Just a normal, everyday figure of speech. Nobody blinked, except Alma. I saw her write something down in her notebook. She had this weird little smirk. The meeting ended. Everything seemed fine. The next morning, Dave wasn't at his desk. Around 10 a.m., we all got a company-wide email from Alma. It was short and cold. It said that Dave was no longer with the company, effective immediately, and that we should respect his privacy during this transition. The office went completely silent. You could have heard a pin drop. We were all in shock. Dave was the company? Firing him was like a football team firing its star quarterback. Nobody knew what happened. We all just assumed it must have been some huge secret screw-up. I found out the truth later that day from Chloe, a quiet but sharp woman in the finance department. She was friends with someone in HR. Chloe cornered me by the coffee machine, looking pale. She told me Alma had called Dave into her office right after the meeting. She fired him on the spot. The official reason? Fostering a non-inclusive environment through the use of gendered, exclusionary language. His crime was the word manning. Apparently, she told him it was a form of microaggression that reinforced patriarchal norms and could make female colleagues feel unwelcome in technical roles. He was immediately escorted out of the building, not even allowed to pack up his desk. I felt sick to my stomach. This wasn't just corporate nonsense anymore. This was a purge. Dave, who had mentored half the people in that office, who had built the company from the ground up, was thrown out like trash over a single, harmless word. That's when the fear really set in. We all realized that our jobs weren't safe. Our years of service, our performance reviews, our successful projects, none of it mattered. All that mattered was whether you stayed on the right side of Alma's ideology. The office morale plummeted. The easy collaboration we used to have was gone. People stopped joking around. Everyone became guarded, afraid to say the wrong thing. Emails became more formal. Conversations were short and strictly work-related. It felt like working in a library where the librarian had a taser. Then came the new hires. Alma personally handled the recruitment process to replace Dave and a few other senior guys who quietly resigned after he was fired. The new lead engineer was a woman fresh out of college. Her resume was thin on experience but heavy on extracurriculars. Co-chair of this empowerment club, founder of that diversity initiative. During her interview, she apparently spent most of the time talking about the importance of decolonizing the tech space. She got the job. 2 other new developers were hired, both women, both with similar backgrounds. They formed a clique almost instantly. They would spend half the day gathered around one desk, talking loudly about TV shows, astrology, and how awful men were. Their work was, to put it mildly, not great. They missed deadlines constantly. Their code was sloppy and full of bugs. As a project manager, it was my job to get them to perform. It was impossible. Any attempt to give constructive feedback was met with hostility. If I pointed out a bug in someone's code, I wasn't helping them improve. I was tone policing them. If I asked why a task was taking 3 days instead of the estimated one, I wasn't managing the project. I was creating a high-pressure, toxic environment. They would complain directly to Alma, and she would always take their side. She'd call me into her office and lecture me about my outdated authoritarian management style. She told me I needed to be more of a servant leader and focus on emotional validation rather than arbitrary deadlines. My job became a nightmare. I was basically a babysitter for a group of incompetent employees who were protected by the CEO. I spent most of my time fixing their mistakes myself, often working late into the night. The quality of our output was tanking. We started getting complaints from clients for the first time in years. Bugs were slipping into production builds. Deadlines were being pushed back. When I brought these client concerns to Alma, she would find a way to twist it. The client wasn't unhappy with our poor work. They had unrealistic expectations. Our team wasn't underperforming. The client was not respecting our work-life boundaries. She saw everything through this bizarre ideological lens. Every problem was someone else's fault, usually the fault of some vague patriarchal system. The old team was dissolving. More of the original guys left. They saw the writing on the wall. They knew it was a sinking ship. Each time one of them resigned, Alma would hold a meeting and talk about how the culture is now healing and how people who are not aligned with our new values are choosing to move on. She was celebrating the destruction of a perfectly good company. I started looking for a new job, but the market was tough, so I adopted a new strategy, the gray man. I became as boring and invisible as possible. I agreed with everything in meetings. I nodded along during the workshops. I used all the right buzzwords in my emails. My goal was just to survive, to collect my paycheck and get out of there without getting a target painted on my back. It worked for a while. I was miserable, but I was employed. The company was barely staying afloat on the reputation it had built over the last decade. Old clients were starting to drop off, but Alma managed to sign one massive new contract. It was with a huge, prestigious client, the biggest deal in the company's history. It was a make-or-break project. If we pulled it off, we'd be set for years. If we failed, the company was probably finished. Alma announced it at an all-hands meeting, like she had just won a Nobel Prize. She declared that this project would be a testament to our new, more collaborative and inclusive work model. Then she looked directly at me and said that I would be the lead project manager. I felt a cold dread wash over me. She was putting me in charge of the most important project in the company's history, with a team I knew was completely incompetent. It was a trap. If the project succeeded, she would take all the credit for her brilliant leadership. If it failed, I would be the scapegoat, the remnant of the old toxic culture, who couldn't adapt and sabotage the company's future. I had no choice but to accept. The project started, and it was a catastrophe from day one. The new engineering team didn't even seem to understand the client's basic requirements. They argued about the color of the UI instead of building the core functionality. They spent a week debating the emotional impact of a button's design. I was working 14-hour days, trying to steer the ship away from the iceberg. I rewrote their technical specs at night. I debugged their code on the weekends. I was doing the work of 3 people, just to keep us from immediately defaulting on the contract. The new hires resented my efforts. They saw my intervention not as a desperate attempt to save the project, but as a personal attack. I was micromanaging. I was stifling their creativity. One of them, the new lead engineer, told me my male ego couldn't handle seeing women in charge of technical decisions. I was losing my mind. I tried to raise the alarm with Alma. I showed her the project plan, the missed milestones, the bug reports. I laid out the facts, clear as day. We were on a direct path to failure. She looked at the documents, then looked at me with a condescending smile. She told me that I was focusing too much on rigid metrics and not enough on team harmony. She explained that my fixation on problems was creating a negative energy that was hindering the team's organic creative process. I realized then that I was talking to a brick wall that quoted corporate wellness blogs. There was no getting through to her. She was in a reality of her own making. The breaking point came about 2 months into the project. We had a major deadline for a beta delivery to the client. The night before, I stayed up until 3 a.m., piecing together the broken parts of the code just to have something, anything, to show them. It was a mess, but it was functional. Barely. The next morning, I came into the office, exhausted. The lead engineer walked up to my desk. She was furious. She accused me of going behind her back and changing her code without permission. I tried to explain that her code didn't work and that I had to fix it or we would have nothing to deliver. She started raising her voice, saying I had invalidated her contribution and exercised my privilege to override her work. The whole office was watching. She stormed off to Alma's office. 10 minutes later, I got the summons. The dreaded HR meeting invite. I walked in. Alma and an HR rep were sitting there. Alma had a look of triumphant disappointment on her face. The look of someone who was waiting for you to fail and is delighted that you finally did. She didn't waste any time. She told me that there had been a serious complaint about my conduct, that I had created a hostile and toxic environment for my female colleagues, that I had undermined the lead engineer, sabotaged the team's collaborative spirit, and demonstrated a clear inability to work within the company's new cultural framework. I didn't even argue. What was the point? It was a kangaroo court. The verdict was decided before I even walked in the room. I just sat there, numb. She told me they were terminating my employment, effective immediately. As I was being walked out, I passed by the new team. They were all huddled together, looking at me. Not with sympathy, but with smug satisfaction. I was the last of the old guard, the final pillar of the old, toxic Innovatech. And now I was gone. They had won. The asylum was officially being run by the inmates. I walked out of that building and didn't look back. Being escorted out by HR felt surreal. One minute you're a senior manager, the next you're a security risk who can't be trusted to get his own coat. It was humiliating, but mostly I just felt a strange sense of relief. The weight was gone. The daily dread of walking into that office, of navigating the ideological minefield, of babysitting incompetent activists, it was over. I went home, slept for 12 hours straight. The next few weeks were a blur of updating my resume and applying for jobs. I kept in touch with Chloe, the woman from the finance department. She was one of the few sane people left at Incompetence, and she was my inside source. We'd grab coffee every week or so. She'd give me the latest updates from the sinking ship. With me gone, Alma had promoted the new lead engineer to be the official head of the big project. According to Chloe, the project immediately went from a slow-motion train wreck to a full-blown dumpster fire. Without me there to work all night fixing their mistakes, the whole thing fell apart. The client started getting daily builds that were completely broken. Features that worked one day would disappear the next. The new team's response was to blame the client. Chloe overheard a conference call where the lead engineer told the client's technical lead that he needed to check his privilege when he pointed out a critical bug in the database. The client was a massive old-fashioned manufacturing company. You can imagine how well that went down. They started documenting everything, every missed deadline, every bug, every unprofessional email. Alma, of course, was completely oblivious. She was too busy with her vanity projects. She spent a fortune redesigning the company website to feature smiling stock photos of diverse women in tech. She instituted Mental Health Fridays, where the team was encouraged to log off at noon to recharge, even as the most important project in the company's history was burning to the ground. She was posting on LinkedIn every day about how proud she was of the vibrant, female-led culture she was building. It was pure delusion. Chloe told me the atmosphere in the office was getting desperate. The few remaining competent people were either actively looking for other jobs or had just completely checked out. They would do the bare minimum required to not get fired, waiting for the inevitable end. The new hires, meanwhile, were thriving. For them, this was paradise. A job with no accountability. They could do terrible work, treat clients and colleagues with contempt, and face no consequences. In fact, they were rewarded for it. They were the perfect employees for Alma's new Incompetence. About a month after I was fired, I got a call from an unknown number. It was the project manager from the client side of the big project, the guy who was on the receiving end of all the chaos. He was very professional. He said he was sorry to hear I was no longer with the company and that things had deteriorated significantly since my departure. He asked if I'd be willing to talk off the record. We met for a beer. He basically wanted to know what the hell had happened to the company. He said they had worked with Incompetence for years on smaller projects and had always been impressed with our professionalism and technical skill. Now, he said, it was like dealing with a completely different company, a company run by petulant children. I told him the whole story. The new CEO, the culture workshops, the firing of Dave, the new hires, everything. He just listened, shaking his head in disbelief. When I was done, he told me they were pulling the plug. They were preparing to formally terminate the contract for breach of terms and were bringing in their legal team to try and claw back their initial investment. He said his company had lost months of time and millions of dollars because of this fiasco. He also said something that stuck with me. He said, "We hired you guys to build software, not to be a social experiment." A week later, Chloe called me. She sounded frantic. The hammer had dropped. The client had sent a formal notice of termination. The lawyers were involved. The news ripped through the company. Alma called an emergency all-hands meeting. According to Chloe, it was a masterclass in deflection and blame shifting. Alma stood in front of the entire company and announced that they had made the difficult but necessary decision to part ways with the client. She claimed the client was a bad partner with a toxic culture that did not align with our company's values. She tried to spin the colossal failure as a noble act of standing up for their principles. Nobody was buying it. The money from that contract was the only thing keeping the lights on. Everyone knew it. The layoffs started the next day. It was a bloodbath. Most of the remaining old guard was let go. The support staff, the finance people. Chloe lost her job. But the new hires, Alma's chosen ones, they were all safe. She kept her clique of incompetent ideologues while firing the people who actually kept the business running. The company was now a ghost ship, crewed by a handful of people who couldn't code their way out of a paper bag, led by a captain who thought the iceberg was the one at fault. I landed a new job around that time, a better position, more pay, at a competitor. It felt good. I was moving on. But I couldn't help but watch the final slow-motion collapse of Incompetence from a distance. I created a group chat with Dave, Chloe, and a few of the other guys who had been forced out. We called it the Incompetence Survivors Club. It became our space to share news and gallows humor about the company we used to love. The news was always bad. The company's Glassdoor page became a wasteland of one-star reviews. Former employees, now free from fear, were posting anonymously, detailing the whole story of Alma's disastrous reign. They wrote about the firings, the incompetence, the toxic positivity that masked a complete lack of substance. The company's reputation was destroyed. They couldn't find new clients. They couldn't hire new talent, not that they were trying. The investors who had hired Alma were apparently furious, but their hands were tied. She had a contract. The final death spiral took about 6 months. It was a slow, agonizing bleed-out. One day, Chloe sent a picture to the group chat. It was a photo of the front of our old office building. A big "For Lease" sign was plastered on the window. The Incompetence logo on the door had been scraped off. It was officially over. A successful, profitable 15-year-old company, destroyed in less than a year. Not by a market downturn, not by a competitor, but from within. It was killed by an ideology that valued empty gestures over actual results. A few weeks after that, Dave suggested we all get together for a drink. A sort of final wake for the company. There were about 8 of us at a quiet bar. All the old faces. The people who had actually built that place. We weren't celebrating. It was more somber than that. We were mourning something we had all poured a significant part of our lives into. Towards the end of the night, one of the guys pulled out his phone. He said, "You guys have to see this." He'd found Alma's LinkedIn profile. She had updated her job title. She was no longer CEO of Incompetence. Her new title was Independent Culture and Strategy Consultant. And her most recent post, from that very day, was a long, self-congratulatory screed. It was about her journey at Incompetence. She wrote about how she had bravely tried to transform a stagnant, male-dominated culture. She talked about the resistance to change she faced from entrenched legacy players. She painted the company's failure not as her fault, but as proof that the tech industry wasn't ready for truly progressive leadership. The last line was the kicker. Sometimes the most empowering decision a leader can make is to walk away from a system that refuses to evolve. I am excited to take the lessons I've learned and help other organizations navigate their own cultural transformations. There was absolutely zero self-awareness, no accountability. In her mind, she hadn't failed. She was a visionary, a martyr for the cause. The rest of us were just the villains in her heroic story. The post had been up for a few hours. It had 3 likes. One was from the incompetent lead engineer she had hired. The other 2 were from the other new hires. Her little clique was all that was left of her fan club. And then there was one comment. It was from the project manager of the client whose contract she had destroyed. The comment was simple, brutal, and professional. It just said, "Our company lost $2.7 million and 18 months of development time due to the gross mismanagement and profound lack of professionalism we encountered under your leadership. The only lesson to be learned here is that competence and integrity still matter more than buzzwords. We wish you the best in your future endeavors." The guy who showed us the phone scrolled down. Alma had deleted the comment, but someone had screenshotted it first. And that screenshot was now making the rounds on tech industry forums. We all just sat there, looking at the phone. And then Dave started to laugh. It wasn't a happy laugh. It was a deep, tired, and incredibly bitter laugh. Then I started laughing. Then everyone else. We were laughing at the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of it all. That this woman could wreck so many careers, destroy a perfectly good company, and still see herself as the hero. That she would face no real consequences, protected by a shield of buzzwords and ideology. She would just fail upwards, moving on to inflict her brand of chaos on some other unsuspecting company. We raised our glasses. Dave said, "To merit. It's a nice idea anyway." We drank to that. We all found new jobs, good jobs. We're all doing fine. But I'll never forget what happened at Incompetence. It was a first-hand lesson in how quickly things can fall apart when the people in charge value ideology more than reality, It's not about men versus women. It's about competence versus incompetence. And we saw what happens when incompetence is given a crown and a righteous cause. It burns everything to the ground.